I'm Ryan Pryor with StickDulcimer.com, and I'm here today with Scott from Stringjoy. Scott,
Ryan.
how's it going, man? It's good to talk again. We've only had a few conversations thus far, and they've been exciting and fruitful. I know there's a lot of people out there who have asked about strings and string tensions and which strings do I put on things. I thought our partner at Stringjoy, who we partner with to get some of the Seagull Merlin strings in, he's the guy who would answer those questions. I'm not the authority on all things strings. I just know what I've seen and what we've emailed about. So first off, tell us about Scott. Tell us about Stringjoy, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I'm excited to wrap about all this. We talked a little bit about these instrument types, and frankly, I had seen them around, but I'm not sure how much I would know about them if not for you. It's a really interesting side of the market, and they seem like really, really cool instruments. It's fun to be able to take on a new challenge and address the needs of a particular instrument. As we've seen, even with the guitar, which has been studied for decades and fussed over more than most things that exist. There's a lot of stuff that goes kind of underthought when it comes to strings and all that. So I'm excited. The brief sort of intro on us: we're a Nashville-based string manufacturer. If you hear a small roar behind me, it's string winding machines and winders, people working with them to make great strings. So that's certainly our mission, is to make the best strings that we possibly can for all the people that we can. And it's been really fun, like I said, to kind of include stick dulcimer players in our world, being that we focus a little bit more on the guitar side of things. So that's been cool.
As someone who is, sort of tangentially familiar with these instruments, but is an expert in strings, all things strings, I kind of wanted to chat about comments all the time on my YouTube videos. Is I have a D and I want to go to G. Mm-hmm. Can I do that? How do I do that? What's involved in that?
Remind me on that too, and maybe for the benefit of some watchers as well. So relative to each other, which one is the lower tuning? Is the G that's the lower and the D is tuned up, or reverse?
D is the standard here, and most instruments in the pick and stick and strumstick side, G is the G above D, right. The fourth above. Confuses people out there a lot is that the G Merlins, they ship with the G below.
I was gonna say, because I've seen some that we've worked on where it's that G is like a 40, which is more comparable to for any guitarist out there, the G that's the third fret of the low E string. Should be that same as the low string of those. Right. And so yeah, that's a really interesting thing for any instrument to have. Sometimes that G and then up 5 half steps is also a standard for D, and then up a whole octave can also be seen. So that is a very wide range, and it's interesting to. I can see why there'd be some confusion in the market for knowing how to transition between those, because those are really wide differences. I mean, for example, from that G to G, the low G to the high G, that's the difference between a bass guitar and a regular electric guitar, which are wildly different instruments, obviously. Yeah. Kind of pulling up on our tension calculator to look here at that low G. We'll just talk about that string to keep it simple. What would give you kind of the normal tension amount for these instruments is a 40. But then when you go up to the D, you'd be looking at around a 26. And then if you go up even higher to that next G up, the same tension would be an 18 plain, or let's see what wound string equivalent would be, about a 20 wound. So again, just a really, really broad variety of gauges that can work here. And that's what I think is kind of interesting. So first thing, do these instruments have truss rods? I don't assume that they do.
They do not.
So yeah, obviously you want to keep your tension in kind of a reasonable range. When I looked up the strings that are being sold right now, not from us, but from Seagull Merlin, I believe they use like 12, 16, 25, which is not a bad set, really. That would be, I assume, for the D tuning. So, I asked about the truss rod because when you get to too high of tension in terms of pounds, in a guitar or a bass, you have a steel truss rod that'll help kind of fight the neck from bowing. With these, you don't have that. So you want to keep the tension kind of lower. I think that 15-pound range, which is what you see in the Seagull sort of string world, makes a lot of sense. So, to me, just to kind of cut to the chase slightly for anyone that's like, tell me what gauges, I know what they are, tell me what I should get. Something for like a standard D tuning of like that 12, 16, 26, or 25 that would work pretty well. You'd do like a wound 16. That'd work okay. Whereas like for the lower G, you'd have to go all the way up to like a 40 on the bottom, a 26 or so for the D, and then like an 18 for the G, probably a plain for the G.
So here's a G tune Merlin. You can see lower wound, mid wound, and this might not have been something we talked about or you knew. Is they doubled the octave in the sense that it's two Gs, but it's actually two different octaves. It's wound and plain, so it's
yeah. Could you play the low G again? Is that low G the same octave as the wound?
No, it is not. They're two different.
Interesting. So you should ignore what I said, actually. I didn't realize that. How cool.
Yeah, it's 3 octaves.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so that's G2, D3, G3, and then I think that high one is G4 as well on like octave numbers with like on a piano key. So for that one, if I'm reading it all right, something like a 40 for the low G, a 26 or so wound again for the D, a 20 wound for the G, and then a 9 plain for the upper G, the octave 4. That would give us all like a pretty nice sort of balanced tension that wouldn't be too high for the neck. That's cool.
With the Merlins, they have these bridges on them, the bridge saddle that is, can't see, is fixed. So it's glued down, it's fixed. So when you have those thicker gauges, the compensation, which is where the bridge is actually placed, or the bridge saddle is placed, the way that they've angled that on the high and the low sides is different than the way they did it for the DAD tuned ones. So a lot of the emails and forums and comments, you'll see people say, well, first off, why can't I just tune my D to G and vice versa? And then second off, when they find out there's a difference, it comes, well, why can't I just change my strings?
Yeah, and I should speak to that too. So for one, for folks out there wondering why it'd be a bad idea to just tune the same strings up or down, rather. If you tune, strings that are good for one tuning down 5 half steps, you'll get to where there's not enough tension, meaning the strings will just kind of buzz around. You'll hear them hitting the frets. It won't be very pleasant. On the other side, the greater risk, especially with these instruments, is if you tune up 5 half steps on the same strings, then you're adding a lot of tension, substantial amount more tension to how those strings are pulling against the neck of the instrument, which for these without a truss rod would be bad. It would cause them to bow over time.
Yeah. Snapping strings, the other problem, right?
Yep, that'll happen too.
Yep, and then also just the amount, because that tension, you need more pressure to push the string down, right? Like, oh, this hurts. When changing from D to G, we have to find new strings, period, right? Like the integrity of the instrument, the integrity of the strings, and the comfort of your hands all play a factor in why you should not make the attempt of, I'll just twist it more or less, right? To get D to G or G to D, you need...
if you're a super technical person and want like a great resource, not to prop my own thing, it's just a free resource at tension.stringjoy.com, tension.stringjoy.com. We have a tension calculator. It's set up for electric or acoustic guitar, but that doesn't matter. If you change the scale length to 22.5, it's around where a lot of these are, whatever your instrument particularly is, plug in your tuning and select the strings that you're using. If you'll see what the tension is, and then you can change the note that you're looking to tune to, and then reselect a string gauge that matches the tension that you were getting on your last set of strings. Again, just if you really want to play around and experiment and see what might be right, that would be a handy resource to do that.
Said a second ago, but you have to have a different bridge saddle on the Merlins in order to make the low versus the high G to D work. That small little difference of where the string crosses right here, especially for the low strings, has to be slightly different than if it's a thinner string because of the physics of it, right? Like the tension and the length of it and everything like that, correct?
Yep. Yeah, so as you change the string gauge, you do indeed need to change the exact length that string is resonating at in order to get it to play true at each fret. So when you play a given fret, you want that note to be in tune. So on like electric guitars, you can move this around with a screwdriver. So you can really kind of experiment with different gauges pretty widely. With instruments like these that have fixed bridges and fixed saddles, you can't get away with quite as much of that. So, for example, if you're playing in that standard D with like the 12, 16, 25, that's probably what Seagull Merlin's cutting those saddles for. You might be able to experiment a little bit around that, but if you go too far away, you'll notice that it won't intonate properly, just like you said. Now, something that I think is kind of cool on those floating bridge models that you mentioned, you could, in theory, change where the floating bridge is, right, and adjust your intonation that way. And for folks out there too, that wondering about tuning and intonation, like those words seem very similar. The difference with intonation is you might nudge that floating bridge around, and the string will definitely be in tune to a different note. But even if you retune it, when you play a fret, that note might be sharper or flatter than it was before. That's intonation, how well the instrument is in tune across the entire fretboard, basically.
How often should you change your strings?
Oh, great question. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it totally depends on the player, right? Like, even in the acoustic guitar world, some people change their strings once a year, or some people will go years without changing them. For some people, they can't necessarily hear the difference, or they don't have super acidic sweat, and so by all means, keep them on as long as you're comfortable with it. But if you do care more about the tonality of your instrument, you want it to have that sort of bright sound that new strings have, or you find that your sweat's kind of acidic and strings are aging faster, you're getting gunk and grime and stuff building up, then it's a good time to change your strings. I would say kind of the normal range in my world, more like acoustic guitar world, is more in the 2 to 6 month range is when a lot of people will change. Some people will change them every week that are playing all the time, and really passionate about what their guitar sounds like. I think realistically, that's my average is a little bit longer because a lot of people just don't want to deal with that all the time. And certainly, there's a couple ways to tell. For one, just like look if you're looking at them and they're starting to get pretty discolored or gunky. If you're playing on them and you can feel, that they're not really smooth anymore, definitely you should probably get those changed. But you can oftentimes hear when strings will, start to go dead a little bit. Obviously, well-made strings last even longer, and that's why, for us, I think several months at least is perfectly reasonable. But depends a little bit on the player. A lot of people don't even understand when they pick up a stringed instrument for the first time that the strings are not a permanent part of the instrument, that they are meant to be changed out somewhat regularly. With the ones with the floating bridges, that's where it's a little bit more interesting. An issue some people have when they, in guitar land, when they pick up a guitar with a floating bridge, is they change the strings, they take it off, the bridge kind of falls off or whatever, and then they don't remember where the bridge went exactly. Right. So for those people, I always say, like, use a little bit of painter's tape or something just to mark where it was, so you can know where it should go to get proper intonation next time you put it on.
Thank you for your time today, Scott. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
Absolutely, man. Hopefully we can do it again soon about some other topic we'll come up with. We'll just see what people say. For everybody out there, leave us a comment, ask questions, and we will get back to you. Thank you.